are growing concerns over school districts using surveillance technology during remote classes. A new report by the 74 takes a closer look at this issue after the pandemic forced most students to attend school from home. Now Congress is getting involved. Lawmakers are calling on these education technology companies that monitor students to explain their business practices, saying that the 24/7 digital monitoring is a, quote, clear invasion of student privacy, especially since students and families are often unable to opt out. But at a time of heightened social isolation, supporters praise the software for helping to keep students safe from dangerous online content. Education-focused news website, the 74 reporter Mark Keierleber has been following this story and joins us once again to talk more about this update. Hey, I'm so glad you're here. So
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
dove into this before. Yeah, we dove into this before, and we really got a great explanation about, what this software was used for, what the companies say the software is doing versus the experience of the user. And in many cases, the user, the kids, parents didn't really know it was there. The surveillance tools were marketed as student safety solutions. But that's actually coming from the companies. There's actually a lack of research showing just how effective they are. So what are lawmakers saying to the technology companies? What are they hoping to learn?
Yeah, great. Thanks. That's a good question. And really, the group of Democratic lawmakers who are sending these letters to these companies, they really asked two big overarching questions. They asked the companies to provide data that show that the software isn't unfairly targeting students and perpetuating what they called discriminatory biases. And they also asked, hey, what are you doing to ensure that you are preserving student privacy and frankly, following relevant federal laws? So the first one, perpetuating, discriminatory biases. They're really concerned about the fact that these tools could perpetuate racial disparities in student discipline, for example. They're really concerned that LGBTQ kids in particular could be unfairly targeted because some of these keywords that are being monitored include words like gay and lesbian. And they're really concerned that low-income students could unfairly be surveilled because these are the devices that they have at home, these school computers that schools across the country distributed to kids as the pandemic forced kids into, distant remote learning.
Right, of course. And if that's your only device that you have, because you don't have the option, then everything, every way that you interact online is probably going to happen through that device. So what about the companies? Are they playing ball? Are they, delivering the information that the lawmakers need? I just, as you were talking, I was just thinking about the issue with Facebook and how, often lawmakers and the rest of us don't know how this software works. We don't understand how the company works internally, and so we depend on the companies to be transparent in order to determine whether or not legislation is needed. So what about the companies? How are they reacting to this interest, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that it's going to be really interesting to see, frankly, how they respond. I did reach out to the companies, and most got back to me and said, hey, we do plan to respond to the lawmakers, so they will be sending the lawmakers a letter. It'll be really interesting to see, though, if the senators are satisfied with the results. Certainly, I've asked one of these companies called Gaggle to really explain the algorithm that powers its tool, and they say, hey, this is proprietary information. So getting under the hood is probably going to be a little bit of a tricky issue that the lawmakers really are going to face here.
So are there any potential solutions? I think that it's a valid argument that this sort of software does some really good work too, and does catch, students who were in need of help. It's certainly unnerving if you didn't know it was on there, and it's definitely unnerving if you're just writing a school assignment and you get flagged. But what are the possible remedies, or is it just these surveillance programs have to be removed from the computers?
Right, absolutely. Well, and to your first point, yesterday and frankly, on multiple occasions in the last few weeks, there have been acts of violence in schools. Before the pandemic, these companies were really marketing themselves as solutions to prevent, school violence, like school shootings. And so now that kids are returning to remote learning, I do think that maybe they might make that pivot back to talking about preventing, school violence. Now, in terms of solutions, I mean, there's this federal law passed in 2000 called the Children's Internet Protection Act. This Clinton-era law in the era of Windows 98 that required schools and libraries to monitor students' activities online. They were really concerned at the time that kids were going to be using school technology to look up harmful material, and there would be, a school official or a librarian who would be walking around the computer lab, looking over students' shoulders to make sure that they were on task and that they weren't, viewing websites that they shouldn't be, right? So I think the first and foremost thing is that, advocates are really asking the Federal Communications Commission to send guidance to school districts and say, hey, this really goes far above and beyond what that 2000 law requires. At that time, they really didn't envision a world in which algorithms were sifting through billions of student communications every year in search of problems. And they've also, advocates have also asked lawmakers, like the ones, that signed these letters, to maybe craft legislation that would make that more explicitly clear if if the FCC isn't interested in taking that on themselves.
One of the things that we talked about last time we spoke was the issue of transparency, a lack of transparency in terms of, what the students and families were aware of, that the software was on there and what it was doing. You referenced the Minnesota school district that is using Gaggle. Do we know if parents are aware of this technology? I'm just thinking about it from my point of view. I get a lot of emails from the school that my kid goes to. I get a lot of emails from the parent organization. There could be something like that in any one of these emails. I could easily miss it if there wasn't sort of a clear point being made that it was important information to have. So do we know if there's been a move towards more transparency with some of these school districts?
That's a really great question. And when you hear the names of these companies, Gaggle, GoGuardian, they're not Facebook, they're not Google, they're not household names, right? They're not companies that most of your reader or most of your audience has probably heard of before, but they are impacting millions of students across the country. So it's really interesting that they're pretty low profile considering the impact that they have on a lot of different students. And in terms of the transparency, the families that I have spoken with in Minneapolis and elsewhere, they really didn't know that this is something that was on their, students' devices either until news of these contracts became, public, or the kids themselves ran into experiences where school officials reached out to them and said, hey, we found this on your student's computer, and frankly, a lot of the students and the parents they're really taken aback by it. They feel like they should have had more more transparency from the school district or from the companies themselves to really say, hey, this is something that is on your machine. This is something that you need to worry about. It's not just monitoring you between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., this is something that's going to be looking at your school-issued devices or technology in the middle of the night and on holidays and, 365 days a year.
Yeah. Mark, always great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So in a statement to CBS News, the CEO of Gaggle, Jeff Patterson, says in part, quote, Gaggle shares the senator's commitment to supporting student mental health and making sure technologies are serving children's best interests. And we welcome the opportunity to share information about how Gaggle serves as an early warning system to help school districts prevent tragedies such as suicides and acts of violence, while also maintaining important ethical, privacy, and data security protections. CBS News has also reached out to each of the companies who received letters, but we have not heard back yet.